We are working on enhancing the Sports Heroes project from the YByte Python curriculum available at www.ybyte.in. Now, Sports Heroes is all about taking data from sports tournaments. We take, for example, Wimbledon and French Open, and analyzing the data to gain more insights from it. Now, one of the things that we did in our class project was to find out those players who have won this tournament more than once, kind of visible over here. For example, Roger Federer has won Wimbledon 8 times, and in these many years. Similarly, let's say take Rafael Nadal, he has won it twice in 2008 and 2010, for example. So all of these people here who have won this more than once, we created a set called MTO winner set. Basically, MTO standing for more than once. But in the class project, we did not pursue this further. We just left it there. However, it turns out that there's a very, very interesting idea that we can do, which is to analyze this data further to find out, let's say, what we call winning streaks. Now, by example, look at the number of years Federer has won it. So he won it 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007. You notice clearly that this is a 5 year streak in a row, then the streak broke, and then after that it was subsequent years. Look at, for example, Bjorn Borg, amazing. It is again a streak of 5 years. So basically, he won it in 5 consecutive years. I mean, amazing achievement. But what we are going to do in this video is to analyze the years won for these players who have won this tournament more than once, and find out what is the longest streak that they have had in this succession. Let's say, and later on, we are going to make this a part of the analysis.dat. So, for example, like I said, Roger Federer, 5 years in a row. Bjorn Borg, 5 years in a row. Pete Sampras, say 4. Now, it turns out that this analysis, going from, let's say, this list of years won to extracting the streaks, is in fact quite interesting. Lots of steps in this. So, we are going to, come across some interesting Python, let's say, functions with this. Also, the logic here is somewhat involved and hence quite interesting. So, this is a nice bonus idea, good programming practice, and also things to learn about Python in general. So let's do this in a step-by-step manner in this video. First thing first, let me, create some kind of like an outline structure where we are going to, let's say, capture these streaks. Now, remember, these streaks make sense only for MTO winner set. So what I'm going to do is to follow something similar to what we were doing earlier, like the structure wise, we're going to do the same thing. I get into my function called analyze. Okay, so post my country centric analysis. I get, for example, the MTO winner. So I'm right here, basically, in the analyze function, and I'm going to call let's say, I'm going to define, let's say, winning streaks as a list. Now the basic structure is going to be maintained. So I'm going to make this a list of dictionaries, just like we were doing earlier. However, now this whole thing will run in, let's say, MTO winner set, because only for the MTO winners does this make sense. Again, I'm going to take this, let's say, exactly this statement. So basically this winner set, I go and find out in the winners info list, the entry where I have the chosen name as the player. So we will create an empty dictionary here called, say, streaks. I'll use curly brackets. Remember, curly brackets empty give you a dictionary. So this is dictionary, and I'm going to say, okay, look, this dictionary will have two keys: the name of the player, which obviously has to be the player, and then we will have one more, let's say, category, say streaks. Let's call it longest streak. So longest streak, let's say, and this is a number in years. So basically, I'm going to tell what is the longest streak that this player has had. And for this purpose, I'm going to create a function called analyze streaks. So analyze streaks here is just a placeholder. So I just call it analyze streaks. Now, what should I pass to this function? Remember, I'm going to pass this the list of years in which the player has won the tournament. And how do I get that? Well, I can look at the selected, say, 0 value of it. And in that, there is one key called years won, which is a list of all those years in which the player has won the tournament. So I'm going to pass this function, this list of years, this list called years won for that particular player. And having done this, this guy will return me, let's say, the streaks. So I will just go and say, well, winning winning streaks, which is a list, remember, a list of dictionaries. I'm going to append this dictionary. So append um, streaks into this winning streak. So, that's basically the same structure that we did for, let's say, the country centric analysis, or before that, the player centric analysis. Exactly what you're going to do now. Winning streaks here is going to be a list of dictionaries, and hence I can use my print, let's say, so I can print an empty line first to start with. And then I can just go and say print table, for instance, the winning streak winning streaks. So now this is just a placeholder. The most important part of this code is in fact this function called with analyze streaks. This is actually somewhat involved. So we will first understand the different steps that are involved in this, create a bit of a structure, then again look at the code and then code it. So let's get started. Remember that the logic for finding streaks essentially comes down to getting a list of strings where every string represents a year number, and from there we must figure out what is the longest streak. But we are going to follow several steps. The first step, and I'm going to showing you this by example so that it becomes easier to understand. The first step that I'm going to do is to convert this list into a list of integers. So for example, here, these are all strings. I will just convert this every item into an integer because, I do this because with integer, we can do arithmetic operations. I can figure out, if this between these 2 years, there's a 1 year gap and so on and so forth, which is what I'm looking for. Um, Having done this, we will convert this into what I call a first difference, or say YD, which is difference of years. So what I mean here is, look, the list here was 2002, 2003, 2004, 2008, 2009. We will find out 2003 minus 2002, that is 1, 2004 minus 2003, that is 1, 2008 minus 4, that is 4, and so on. So we'll take this list and convert this into a list of, let's say, first differences. And again, the logic here is clear. I'm looking for those places where the player has consecutively won this, because that's a streak. I must find out this gap, and that's exactly what I will do next. Now we'll see how we do this in code. It's quite nice. Thereafter, the analysis will basically come down to analyzing this YD. We will figure out, look, where are ones in this YD? Now, why do I look for a one? Well, because remember, one here implies that the player has won this for a consecutive time. That's why the difference between years is one. One implies that there's a consecutive win. Now, when I see multiple wins in place, it means that I've really won many, many, many times. So I will have to find how long is this run of ones. So having found a one, I'll find how long is the run of ones. And then we must find the longest such streak, right? So for example, here 1, 1, 4. Again, there was a consecutive victory, but this is only one. But however, let's say this was longer, then this becomes the longest streak. So I'll just keep finding, the existence of, let's say, one, find out how many consecutive ones are there, and within all those, what is the longest such run, and that will give me the longest streak. So that's the logic at a sort of like a high level, but we will go a little bit deeper into it because this is kind of very interesting actually. Now, how are we going to do this? Um, First, converting every item to integers. Well, remember, we have a list. We want to do this on every item of a list. Let's say a quick way of doing this, efficient way of doing this would be to use the map function. Next, to find the diff, I will use something called a zip. Now, again, I will illustrate this, with some examples. Basically, we'll use zip with slicing to give me the difference. And finally, we will use a nested while loop to find the streaks. Like I said, we'll find a one in the list. If found, we'll keep searching either till we reach the end of the list or till the next one is found. Um, you know, um, Keep doing this until all the streaks have been analyzed. Actually, this nested loop is somewhat involved. We'll see this in a moment. But let's get the other parts done first. So I'm going to get back to my code. Of course, I need a function here called analyze streaks. So I will just go and create that function. Let me just do it right here. So I just go and say def analyze, say streaks. Now remember, this streaks is going to get a list. This function is going to get a list of all the years in which the player has won it. But the items of those lists are all strings. So let me just set this up. So I'm going to just define this function. Let's just call it years one list, right? So here let's say first thing I'm going to do is to convert all items to integers. So one way we can do this is, well, basically I can just define a new list called, let's say, years 1. Now this is the same list, but all the items will be now integers, right? So when we do a map function, it basically does this for us. It's going to run, for example, int on every item of this list. So here's one list that converts this to a list of all integers. Now I can illustrate this here. It's easier that way. So if I were to, let's say, run Python 3 minus I, so if I have, let's say, a list, let's say list called y, where I have, say, 2002, 2003, and say 2005, just for illustration sake. Notice these are all strings. Now, if I were to create a new list called, let's say, let's just say W here, use the map function. So basically, I'm saying, look, run this on every item of this list Y. And the function I'm running is int. So essentially convert the string into an integer. When I look at W, it's the same list in values, but these are all integers. And like I said, I do this because later on I want to do arithmetic operators on these years, and which is basically finding the difference across, let's say, consecutive years, right? Now, the next task I have is to create a new list, which is 2003 minus 2002, 2005 minus 2003, and so on and so forth. I am going to do this using the zip function. Now, this is somewhat new, but again, we will see with examples what this does. Right? So let me first write the code here. We are going to use a little bit of logic to, let's say, do this, say, zip. And I will put let's say years 1. So we are going to do a little bit of slicing over here. So I just go and say 0 to len of years 1 um, minus 1. Now be careful on this, very easy to make a mistake. In steps of 1 and comma years 1. Okay, years 1. So this comma has to be inside 1 to len of years 1 in steps of 1. Now this, like I said, basically we're trying to find the first difference. So this has to be done carefully. This is for the zip. I'm going to convert this to a list. Now we haven't yet understood, or we haven't yet discussed what does zip do. Well, basically it's kind of nice to understand this from an example. Let's say if I have two lists, say 1, 2, 3, say 1, 2, 3, and B is a list called, let's say, 10, 20, 30. Now when I use a zip method, and I say, well, list zip, say A comma B. Now basically what it will do is to create another list. Now C is also a list, as you can see from here, but C is a list of tuples, and each tuple here contains values. First value from A, then B, second value from A, and then B, and then so on and so forth. So each tuple has kind of like zipped them together. Now why are we doing this here? Well, notice I am doing, for example, my list W. Now let's see this in a little bit step-by-step manner. Let's just understand these slicings. So I am doing, for example, W 0 to len of W minus 1 in steps of 1. Basically, this is going to get me the first two items of W. Or let's say if the list was long, let's say list was 10 items long, so I'll get the first 9 items of W. The second slice here is exactly the, let's say the remaining 9, but I will ignore the first. So you can see here that the intention is to create the first difference, and that's what we're trying to do. We are first creating, let's say, a list which is these two items, and then creating a list which is these two items. We are zipping them up together so that the tuple that I formed. So let me just form the tuple that I was doing. So now the tuple that we form is diff, let's say, list zip, and W. So two slices of W basically. Let me do it carefully. So here is 0 to len W minus 1 in steps of 1, whereas here it's 1 to len W in steps of 1. So when I do this, diff, notice, is a list of tuples, but basically I have combined these two, and so on. And the length list could have been much longer, but the same process would have happened. Now, having done this, I want to find out, for example, the difference between these years. Remember, the list YD is the most important one that we are going to analyze. So I'm going to create a list called YD. I'm going to just append this, start with an empty list. And I'm going to say, well, for say for d in diff, please go and append yd dot append say d1 minus d0. Now, why does this work? Because remember, d here is going to be a tuple. So we are just running through this list of tuples. I'm saying this minus this minus this, and so on and so forth. I will end up with yd as my list of differences, exactly like I had been, describing it earlier. Now, having obtained this list, right, we need to now run some logic on this list to figure out the streaks and find out the longest streak in there. For writing this logic, let us try to understand this a little bit better pictorially, because once we have the picture in mind, the logic starts to. For the sake of illustration, let us say my list yd was 111412111. Again, this is just for illustration. Basically, the idea is that I'm going to find the first one in there. So in this case, I'm going to find it right away at, let's say, at position 0. So I just define a variable called st, kind of like a counter. So I'm just going to count how long I'm finding a 1. So I look at the next one. If there's a 1, that's good. I look at the next one till I find that, okay, look, this is a 4 and my streak is broken. So in this case, the streak was 3. My streak breaks. However, I need to still analyze the remaining part of the list. So what I will do is I just record, okay, look, this was a streak of 3, but now I will go and delete this part of the list, because then I can keep using the same logic. So I will end up with a list which is basically 41211. Again, I find a 1, so I start looking for my inner streak again, but I find that this breaks immediately. So I compare with the previous one. Well, not long enough, so I let it be. However, again, I go and delete this part of the list. Now I am left with, let's say, 211. I try to find 1 again. I do find the 1 again. So actually, yeah, this is correct, right? So I find a 1 again. However, I must end because I have reached the end of the list. So there's no more here to be done. Again, I compare, yes, there's a streak of 2, all right. But it turns out that this was smaller than the previous one, and hence my previous one, which is streak of 3, in fact, wins. So this is the logic we are going to use. Now you can see very clearly that this naturally, let's say, is let's say it's sort of pointing towards a nested while loop, because first inner while loop is going to run with respect to counting the streak. So I find a 1, I keep increasing until I find a new one, or I reach the end of the list. However, there's an outer loop running, which is to find all the streaks in this. And since I keep deleting my, let's say, streaks that have been found, basically I can keep running that until the list becomes empty. So that's the whole logic we are going to use in this nested while loop. Um, so I get back to my code over here. I will define a couple of variables to kind of keep me on track. I'm going to say, well, st max is equal to, um, 0. So is this a variable that I just used to count the, let's say, the maximum streak that I've had? And I will define a new variable called done, which is a Boolean variable, which I want to use to control my inner loop. Now, while len of yd is greater than 0, remember, that's my outer loop here. I'm going to say, well, let me set done to false to keep my inner loop in action. And I ask myself a question: if 1 in yd, so if there is a 1 in there, that means possibly there's a streak. Well, I will find out where that 1 is, right? So that becomes my st. I just go and say, well, st equals to yd dot index 1. So basically finding out where that 1 is. And I start counting my streak. So streak, let's say, is, so let's just call it strk is equal to 1. So this is my sort of my counter starting to run. And remember, I will keep doing this till I either reach the end of the list or I do not find a 1. So I use my variable here, the Boolean variable, while not done. So while I'm still not done, I will ask myself a question. Look, if I have reached the end of the list, so, basically, if, let's say, if st is equal to len of yd minus 1, so which means that I've reached the very end of the list. If that is the case, well, I think nowhere to go, so I set my done to true. On the other hand, if I find that my streak is broken, so let's say I find that yd st plus 1 is not equal to 1, Well, this is the case of streak broken. So again, I set done equals to true. Let me just put a small comment here to kind of make it clear. So this situation is end of the list. And this situation here is streak broken. However, if neither of this happens, it means that I have a 1 on YDST plus 1. Um, Basically, I will go and increase my st to st plus 1. So st equals to st plus 1, and this implies that my streak is longer. So I'm just going to say strk is, let's say, plus equal to 1, which same as saying streak equals to streak plus 1. Now remember, having done this, once I get out of my inner loop, so be very careful with the indentation. Once I get out of my inner loop, I'm going to remove some part of the list yd. So I just go and say delete yd 0 to st plus 1. Now think about it. I want to remove it until the st, which is kind of like a pointer to this list. Now having done this, I will compare against earlier. So I will ask myself, look, is my present streak more than the previous streaks? So how do I do that? Well, I will say, well, look, if strk strk plus 1 is greater than st max, um, I'm going to set my st max to be strk plus 1. Now, in case you're wondering why is there a plus 1 needed, well, just hang on for a moment. This will be a lot more clearer from a numerical example, which we are going to do later. However, I still need to do the else condition. So you notice if 1 was in YD, I do all this. If there's no 1 in YD, well, time for me to basically just get out of this loop completely. And I do that by saying YD is equal to an empty list. Now, the moment I do this, remember my outer loop will actually get over. Think through this. The logic is very beautiful, very interesting, somewhat involved, in fact. And having done all this, and I just have to be really careful with the indentation, I will come to the same indentation as a while loop and return my st max. So that's going to tell me the streaks that I have had, right? Now, again, before, let's say, running this as the full function, I'm going to, first comment out this part of the code so that we can see just the analyze function working for us. And also I'm going to put, so let's say comment out this so that there's no error created. Um, just completely comment this out. I am going to get into my analyze streaks function. And just for the sake of, let's say, understanding, I'm going to put a print yd over here so that we can see how this list is evolving. Now, so let's say I analyze the streaks for the exact list that I was, looking at. Say 2003, say 2003, 2004, and say 2000, say 7, and 2009. So let's say this was my list of, the years in which the player has won this. If I were to analyze the streaks for this, very interesting. It finds out the YD. So remember, I found 1, 1, 3, 2. I found that, look, there was a streak of, let's say, 2 1s in a row here. Remember, in the once I find the streak is broken, I go and remove this part of the list. So I have 3 and 2, but there is no streak after this. So that's why I get a value of 3. Now, as I told you, that plus 1 becomes clear from here. 1 1 implies that there have been 2 1s in a row, but that's because I have won this 3 times in a row. So my point is, the actual streak is in fact one more than the number of ones that we are finding, and that's why the plus 1 that we are doing earlier. Now we can take a few more examples. Let's say there was some kind of a winning streak after this. Now again, this is just let's say an example that we are taking. Say 2011 comma 2012. Let's take this as a number. Now here what happened, very interesting. So notice I started with 1 1 3 2 1 1 1. So I found a streak of 2 in the beginning. I removed that from the list. It was 3 2 1 1 1. I found 3 1s in a row, and hence this was my longest streak, exactly as we had wanted it to be, right? Let's take a few more examples. Let's say if I had let's say I had a long break over here, 2017, and then say 2019. I mean, again, this is not a streak, but so when I run this, you notice there's no change whatsoever in the streaks because these new years that I added did not represent a streak. Now, let's take a few more examples. Let's say there's no streak in the beginning, but there is a streak in the end. So let's say this particular pair, all hypothetical anyway, did not have any streak till, let's say, this point here, right? And, maybe we can put 2013 and say 2014. So when I do this, notice there's a 6 year streak, but all of that happened. So initially I found this one and I just kept on going here. I reached the end of the list 5 ones in a row, which means there's a streak of 6 years. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Let's also analyze this once for a situation where there is absolutely no streak. So for instance, let's say something like this. Now, this is a commendable achievement, by the way, but there's no streak here. So 2002, 2004, 7, and 9, you know, I find that, well, there is no streak. So basically, this is kind of doing the job for me. Quite nice, the code, quite interesting, the logic here. I will just go and update my function, my analysis.dat with, let's say, the streak analysis for every player. When I do this, so of course it prints out all this. We can remove this later on. But when I look at, let's say, my analysis, so here's my winning streaks for Wimbledon. So as we saw, Roger Federer has had 5 of these. Bjorn Borg also had 5, Pete Sampras had 4. So, it's kind of picking up the data. Now, obviously, we can sort this again. We can put this in different forms. But the point here is that, the analysis was, I thought, very, very interesting. Really something new in this. And the logic is quite nice, right? So I'm just going to keep this here. I'm just going to undo my print statement for the YD, so that this screen doesn't get cluttered, right? So I hope this was interesting to you. Um, generally speaking, this kind of generally speaking, this way of learning where we are building an activity, thinking through it carefully and enhancing that activity with a meaningful goal in mind is a great way to learn programming because it channelizes our energy in a very nice manner. Look at our website www.ybyte.in because at ybyte, this is how we learn Python programming. Take care. Thank you so much. Bye bye.